depending on the market, a lot of the time, the first steps that you need to take are around regulatory and compliance. So setting up the business, getting the license, that immediately influences all of the other decisions after that, to say that regulatory and compliance is the most important. Now, to stay in business, it's super, super important. But as you get a store open, now all of a sudden customer relationships become really important as well. But what you are legitimately seeing is the influence and the focus of regulatory and compliance first, or safety and security kind of like first, customer experience second.
Beyond window dressing. Cannabis retail success is part art, part science, and Krista Raymer, co-founder and CEO of Vetrina Group, knows more than anyone how important it is to align a dispensary's look and feel with a first-class customer experience, alongside solid data and shopper insights. We catch up with her to understand what good looks like and how great can be achieved. And hello and welcome to the Lobsterpot podcast. I'm Dave Barton, and this gentleman is Jamie Bunthron. How you doing, Jamie? Okay?
Yeah, I've got the good feelings. For some reason, 4:30 usually a slump, but I'm feeling very good today. Full of energy. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Excellent.
It's close to 4:20.
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, I've missed it a little bit. I still have to scrabble around. I'm obviously in a place where it's legal, though, so it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's all good. But we have our guest today. We have Krista Raymer from the Vetrina Group. You're the founder and CEO, and you're going to tell us all about cannabis and retail today. Is that right, Krista?
I will give away as many secrets as I can.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing, and how did you kind of get into sort of cannabis and retail? Because it's it feels like quite a niche area. I mean, we're based in the UK, but there is no such thing as cannabis and retail. But obviously your side of the pond there is. So tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, I think when we first got into the space, it seemed really, really niche to a lot of people. And as more stores in North America have opened up, it's become less niche and more of an opportunity. But we come from traditional retail. So the team was really focused on inventory and assortment, merchandising strategies, and operating a physical retail store. And before cannabis went rec in Canada, we were working with digitally native companies open up pop-up shops. And then we went rec in Canada. We went into a store and was like, this is a really bad experience and could be a lot better for customers. And so how do we make it better? And we went down a path of making relationships within the industry. And that was about 4 years ago. And here we are. We now work with cannabis retailers and licensed producers around how to drive profitable interactions at the store level. So we're super focused on what happens on the sales floor. With special attention to some of the retail sales KPIs, inventory and assortment, merchandising strategies, and promotional calendars to help get product moving and make it easier for our customers to make a purchasing decision.
Very cool. Very cool. I mean, I think our first sort of experience of actually cannabis and retail was back in November when we were at MJ BizCon. I mean, we walked into a few dispensaries, and again, very different experiences. I mean, Planet 13. Do you know, honestly, I expected it to be bigger, but
wow, bigger. Okay.
Because it was just like a nice big shop floor, and it was like a little restaurant. It was cool. And there was that little factory bit. You can see them doing the pre-rolls and all that sort of thing. And then we kind of went to the one that was around the corner from our hotel, which was, it was okay. It was, open the door. I feel like I'm going to go and speak to someone in prison or something, pick up the thing, and big security guard. But then you think, well, dispensaries are cash only in the US anyway. And again, it's such a varied experience. I mean, what do you think that some of the sort of challenges for retail brands are when they're kind of trying to set up? I mean, what, for example, like with the whole cash thing in dispensaries in the US, it's like, well, you have to be security conscious. And I guess it kind of puts you ill at ease if, coming from the UK, I think perhaps, where it's, sort of guns aren't sort of prevalent in the same way they are in, say, the US, for example. But you understand why they need security. But so challenges like that, or challenges regarding sales and things, or just generally, what do you think are some of those biggest challenges?
Yeah, you bring up a couple interesting points, and it's funny that it's like when you're not from that environment, you come in and you can see things really, really clearly, right? Like if you're in a dispensary or in a store every single day, you don't see the same things as when you kind of come in and come bold right at it and you're like, I see everything. You are exactly what customers and how customers experience stores too. And I'm sure that they often have a lot of questions until they've purchased in a couple different stores and see patterns within the industry. How we got here, though, is what's really interesting, is getting and opening a cannabis store, depending on the market. A lot of the time, the first steps that you need to take are around regulatory and compliance. So setting up the business, getting the license, that immediately influences all of the other decisions after that, to say that regulatory and compliance is the most important. Now, to stay in business, it's super, super important. But as you get a store open, now all of a sudden customer relationships become really important as well. But what you are legitimately seeing is the influence and the focus of regulatory and compliance first, or safety and security kind of like first, customer experience second. If we look at other industries, there have been ways to soften what that feels like for the customer. If we think about beautiful hotels, for example, they often have security, and that security might not look or feel the same way as the security in a dispensary. So there are efforts that can be done on both sides to kind of think about that. But this is an example of just like, as we are growing and maturing as a market, where the focus is, what the focus looks like. If we go to more mature markets, this starts to look different. So if we were to go into certain areas of California or really like dispensaries across Canada, the presence and physical awareness as a customer of what security feels like looks very different. And so that's the beginning pieces of starting to become more customer centric. It's creating an environment that influences the way that the customer feels from the very moment that they see the store, never mind go into the store.
The fact that when you get into a dispensary, you're largely going to be led by the bud tenders. Yeah, sure, you can look around product, but it's not like being in a supermarket, apart from the fact that everything is usually to some extent cased off. It's not washing up liquid. It's not detergent. It's not something that's just off the shelf, even though it is off the shelf. So you're often looking for bud tenders for advice, or even if you're an expert and you're very, very keen on cannabis, you're probably going to want to talk to them about things that are happening for them, things that they've seen, because you want to stay tapped into it. It doesn't really matter what side of the kind of customer spectrum you're on. The bud tender plays an unbelievably critical role, for retailers and for consumers. Like, in all the kind of good and bad that you've seen, what do you think some of the kind of key takeaways are? What is it the bud tenders who do it well, what is it that they're doing?
Yeah, I think in this, any bud tender that has an understanding that education and knowledge is built on. Right. So if you walk to use your grocery store as an example, if you walk into a grocery store and see a yellow apple, you already know what an apple looks like. You know the word for an apple. You know the flavor profiles probably of other apples. And you've built an entire framework within your brain that allows you to understand that this yellow apple is probably texture-wise going to be kind of similar to something that you've experienced before, and flavor-wise a variation of something that you've had before. We fundamentally have customers that are at two different stages, or even multiple different stages when they're coming in to purchase. We have a group that has all of those reference points already, who are our educated customers. And then we have a group that isn't. A bud tender that's really great is going to start to identify what reference points the customer has already early in the interaction, so that we aren't going down a path of talking to somebody who knows a lot of things and trying to explain to them what the difference between a sativa, indica, and hybrid is, or that if that is the level of information that the customer is willing to absorb, that we do go down that path. Too often when we walk into a store, you're greeted with like, what are you looking for today? Well, that's an interesting question. It's kind of open-ended, but it's only effective if you already know what you're looking for. Because if you don't know what you are looking for, you've just made the customer feel like they don't know anything. And there's nothing worse as a human of standing there and being like, I'm caught and I don't know a single thing. And now I'm going to try and cover it up that I don't know. Like, people hate to admit that they don't know. So instead, if we started interactions like, have you been in the store before? That's a really great place to start. We then know whether they have shopped directly in that store. Oftentimes, if people will be like, no, but I have been in a store before. We get to know a lot more information about the customer. And there's something that happens within psychedelics that we do a lot. We talk about set and setting, right? It's like understanding what the mindset of the customer is, and then the physical experience they might be consuming within. If a bud tender can get to the bottom of set and setting within an interaction with a customer, they will be 10 times more effective in recommending the right products. So it's really about social interaction more than it is about product knowledge, but leveraging the product knowledge correctly within a social interaction.
No, I mean, it completely resonates. I wrote a blog not too long ago talking about the kind of experience and that exact feeling. No one likes to feel stupid. It doesn't matter if you're in a dispensary or if you're a mechanic. It doesn't matter. Like, no one wants to feel like they don't know. And so few people are comfortable in that situation, holding their hand up and going, hey, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
But if you've got a kind of, cannabis curious customer, if someone's taken the trouble and the effort and overcome any level of anxiety they might or might not have to walk into a dispensary, as a retailer, that's the most amazing customer, because they're already, or potential customer, because they're so open and so already potentially engaged and primed for a sale if they've gone that far. So it's almost like completing that journey for them. They've taken most of the steps themselves. It's just that little bit of hand holding at the end.
You're totally spot on. It's really about making sure that we are not trying to expose the customer, but get to the bottom of what they know and how we can share relevant information that's going to be applicable to them. And that's really hard. Like, retail outside of cannabis, retail has struggled with this since the beginning of time. Like, go and try and buy a car, luxury leather goods, even something that you don't understand, like some kind of cosmetic product, for example, and you experience all of the same things. It's just interesting that we are working within an industry where the majority of customers are starting from this point, where even if they have experience with these products, the way that it is packaged, the way that it is labeled, the way and the articulation of these form factors might look or feel different than what has felt familiar in the past.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, sorry, Jamie.
Go for it, please.
I was going to say, it's kind of like when you take your car to the garage or whatever to kind of, it's like, well, what's wrong with it? Oh, this, that. It's like, okay, can you fix it? That's what I need to know, right? It's that kind of thing. And you don't want to be blinded by the science at the same time. But when it comes to sort of, at the end of the day, dispensaries are there to sell. And, you need, and it shouldn't be at the expense of the customer experience, because again, the whole thing, they should have worked in tandem with each other, right? But I guess when it comes to sort of sales, what is kind of, are we talking about a sort of consultative-led sale? Is that kind of what you would call an effective cannabis or dispensary sales experience?
Totally depends on like who the customer base is, what the experience is, what the inventory depth is, the environment. This is why like working within retail traditionally has been quite difficult, is because it's super applicable to the geo-specific region of what's happening. And so we can't just take like a copy and paste and say, oh, across the board it's going to be good, because we need to apply it to the community. What you needed or wanted out of a store while being in Vegas would be very different than if you had a store around the corner from your home. Your purchasing pattern would be different. The quantity, the products that you might purchase would be different. The set and setting is going to be very different in both of those instances. And so being able to, one, understand what your mix of customer is, what the purchasing patterns of your customer is going to be, will start to influence how or what type of sales environment we should be creating. Ultimately, the best sale is always going to be one where the customer fulfills their needs and is pleasantly surprised by something that maybe they didn't anticipate. And that is going to only be achievable if there is confidence and trust built in that interaction right away. So if that needs to be a longer interaction, that's one thing, but sometimes that's like short and snappy right at a cash desk.
What kind of like role does, in the work that you do, what kind of role does data play? We talk about we've almost sort of touched around the kind of soft skill, what people call soft skills, which always seems like a bit of an undersell of how important they are. But, that kind of social interaction and being able to guide and build trust and loyalty and things like that. But what kind of part does data play on a more kind of quantitative level?
Data is incredibly important. And I would say up until really this year, a lot of people would say, the data, it's like so skewed, it's so short, there's nuances and trends. And they are right. Like, we need to be aware of where and what is influencing the data and what quality the data is at any given time. But where data is more helpful is measuring the effectiveness of the actions that you've taken and then starting to define in what direction you need to go in. So some of our favorite data is actually just like store level KPIs pulled directly out of POS systems to say, what does our quality of sale look like? And quality of sale is going to start to be measured by what is our average per customer? What is our units per customer? What is the gross margin on the transactions and the products? What's the price point or the mix of price points that the customer is purchasing? This is going to start to tell us a little bit of a picture of like where we might be able to amplify it. The reality is within a retail business, there's really 3 ways to grow a retail store. It's add more customers, get the customers to purchase more while they're in the store, or get the customers to purchase more frequently. And in those instances, it's always going to be a mix of those 3 that is going to help us drive and really push a retail store performance. But you have to understand what levers you have within your own retail base to be able to do that. And the data is going to start to tell you that. So, for example, if you have a customer, the average customer in the US over the last year or so has purchased on average like 8 to 9 times in a year. This is the average. So this is where data is kind of skewed. You have your top echelon of customers who would purchase way more frequently than that. And then you would have your bottom ones that are going to pull this average of into the in-between. But 8 to 9 times, if we want to improve the performance of the store, then we need to push and say, how do we get the customer to 10 times? That's going to leverage a lot at the end of the year, upwards of 3 to 5% usually, if we can get our customers to purchase one more additional time. And then it's like, how do we do that? Do we do that with a promotional calendar? Do we do that with the way that our bud tenders are selling? Do we do it through a loyalty program or a combination of all of the above? And so that's where the data starts to tell what actions we need to take and then measure how effective our actions are. But the data in the industry, it's young, it's nuanced. We have to be able to take it and say, it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect for a long time because of how quickly trends are coming and going. And so we've got to be able to add the qualitative feedback to the quantitative data.
It's a really tough challenge when it's that young, because the good thing is, even if you have something existing and you have no idea what the data is, providing it's consistent, you can at least map trends. But if it's changing every 2 weeks, then it's its own nightmare. And especially when historic data is also quite unreliable because of the nature of industry change, legalization change, there's so many kind of things that are impacting it. And you touched on loyalty programs. I'd be really interested to know a bit more if you kind of have an experience of it. Are people at the level that maybe larger retailers in kind of consumer goods are, where they're collecting consumer data on what people are purchasing at individual level and making promotions based on that? How does that compare with maybe traditional retail?
Totally. We're definitely at that point, depending on the market and different places. I would say, like, no matter how young you are, or no matter what stage we are in the market, being able to collect an ability to directly communicate with the customer is always going to help in the future. So that's like kind of the first step. Understanding purchasing rates, understanding what is getting purchased when, being able to start to segment down and offer very specific offerings to different customers we're kind of like just at the tip. I would say that we are doing it in some markets. We definitely aren't doing it as well as we could be for kind of like a number of different reasons. And a lot of the time people will look to regulatory restrictions because of that, is like the free ability to communicate with our customers and what we can communicate. But there definitely is an opportunity to be leveraging a loyalty program to better understand our customer base and then create the purchasing patterns or influence the purchasing patterns that we would like to see. That might be to help us get through slow moving inventory, or that might even be to introduce a new brand if it's a house brand, for example, and we're a vertically integrated retailer. So in all of those instances, loyalty programs play a big part in better understanding our customer, as well as like thanking our customer for being part of our program. And I think that when I look at loyalty programs kind of across Canada and the US right now, there is definitely an opportunity to revisit outside of just giving points or giving discounts. It's like when we work with budtenders and teams, we always say, what's one feature and two benefits? If we're going to present anything to our customer, one feature, two benefits. In a loyalty program, we should be able to say one feature, two benefits at whatever level we're talking about, and that those benefits really resonate with the customer and what they are. And some markets, it's much easier to do than in others. But it's definitely an area of opportunity as we kind of like continue to see the industry grow and become more mature.
That's I get fascinated by all this stuff, mostly from like an outside perspective, not knowing a massive amount about it. But customer data platforms, things like that, you know, the traditional retailers, Tesco in the UK, kind of set the trend and the precedent years and years ago with how effective their collection of customer data was and how targeted it was able to be. Is like I have no idea if it is an urban legend or not. I always really appreciate there's a story of a lady who started being recommended nappies and like products for newborns, and effectively the sort of data around her had figured out, based on her changes in purchasing trends of foods, that there was a very good chance that she was pregnant. I have no idea how true that is, but I think that's a beautiful,
right.
You know, if you can get to that level of like granularity and power in data, it's fascinating, and it's so powerful for retailers.
That's like almost an example that feels borderline creepy, right? You're like, oh my gosh, like, why do you know so much about me? But like, there's another old wives' tale, I guess, about Domino's pizza in the same way in the US, where somebody like reoccurringly purchased pizza like almost every day. And then the purchasing pattern completely stopped. And like the Domino's pizza delivery man went to go check on the person, and they had fallen and like needed help.
Oh, wow.
And was okay. But because of the change in the behavior, they were able to intervene. That is, I think, like a slightly less creepy, more out of care and concern. But like, good for them for loving pizza.
Because hear them knocking on the doors, like, why aren't you eating pizza? Oh, you've fallen over. Well, get up. You need to order some more. No. Again, it's very easy to be cynical about sales and retail and things like from the outside looking in. But I do think, again, it's this, again, you're talking about customer data platforms and things like that. There is so much to be said for, you know, the good that this level of insight can do in terms. I mean, people complain about advertising and things like that. You know, it should be directed at me. People want to, you know, the idea that there's a utility in all of this is, I think, such a critical thing. And I think, again, for an industry like cannabis, you know, educating people, you know, there's that wrapped up in it as well, you know, from bud tenders' perspective, or, you know, understanding what people's needs are. I mean, from a medical perspective as well. I mean, it's a bit of an ask to expect bud tenders to act in the same way as, you know, pharmacists. But again, there must be that element to it, and, you know, that care, concern, that level of insight into what's happening in someone's life, you know, that you can make a positive impact. I think that's feels very much like something that would be quite, you know, cannabis is good at, you know, giving a damn about people as an industry. You know, I think, do you feel like that's the sort of direction it's going in terms of like, if we have all of this stuff, all of this utility, insight, we can do good with it?
I think like any of this data, ultimately, if it's going to help us better serve our customer and serve our customer with a product that is relevant to their life, is really interesting and helpful. Like, we're talking about direct recommendations and understanding purchasing patterns and behavior. Like, we need a lot of data to be able to do that really well. But perhaps the very first iteration of this is actually just being able to make sure that our inventory and assortment is servicing the customer that is shopping with us, that we are carrying the right price points for our community, that we are carrying the right SKU diversity, that we are dropping seasonal products when it is relevant. I want the option to be able to purchase beverages and bring them home over the holidays. Inventory and assortment and purchasing patterns would have told me that that would have been relevant around Christmas. And that's where some of this data comes. It's like, we're just at the very beginning of the applicability of it, but this is where we can start to identify and say, if we have nuances in inventory and assortment, that is literally us beginning to start to better understand our customer.
Absolutely. And I guess maybe in a kind of sort of, broader view in terms of, when people are looking at setting up a retail operation, where, looking at population centers, looking at, where there's other dispensaries, how markets are served. I mean, do you ever get involved in things like that? Do you feel like that? I mean, I know this happening in other aspects of retail. Have you seen that happen in cannabis as well? Like, we should set up here because that is so and so distance from a school, and, there's another dispensary 5 blocks away. So we have this particular neighborhood we could serve.
There's absolutely patterns, and what we can see is like success in where we drop a location and why we might drop it there. Like, really, a physical brick and mortar store is a marketing tool. And so viewpoint traffic becomes super important, understanding what the customer is attempting to do, convenience, and making sure that the location is a convenient location is always a really helpful tool. There are some really cool data that we have used in traditional industries that we're starting to be able to use in cannabis, but it's like understanding population density isn't always as simple as getting like the census reports, because people are mobile and might be living somewhere but are actually spending the majority of their time somewhere else. And so like any kind of telecommunication data and understanding where cell phones are pinging provides such an interesting opportunity to understand where people might go to work in a day, or where they're spending a lot of their time, or what might be convenient that we wouldn't know just based off of population density. So the answer is yes. There are opportunities within that, just like we have seen in other environments. It's also just about understanding what our customer looks and wants and needs in those specific communities and identify trends.
Very cool. Very cool. No, I think there's so much kind of in retail. I mean, we hear about, there's in the UK, there's always this whole kind of speculation around the death of the high street and retail. Traditional retail is not, cutting the mustard, and there's going to be more focus on online and things like that. And I guess cannabis in that respect presents a kind of different challenge in terms of how sales can happen, particularly, I guess, in the US, and, where online sales can happen, how can distribution happen and things like that. I guess what do you think is kind of the future for sort of cannabis retail? What do you think are going to be some of the big trends perhaps this year and then over the next couple of years? What are you excited about?
Yeah, there's a lot of question, just like in traditional retail, about whether brick and mortar will stay versus e-commerce. And I think we can look to other industries to understand some of those trends. There's, for example, in grocery, there's a certain amount of purchasing that happens on e-commerce, but we also know that impulse purchasing doesn't happen on e-commerce sites as much. And so physical will remain a really crucial part of creating customer trust and loyalty within the retail environment. I think that we'll continue to see the growth of convenient form factors. So over the last 2 years, we've really seen kind of like the rise in North America of pre-rolls and the importance of pre-rolls in that purchasing behavior, as well as like where beverages, for example, might start to grow. We still have a lot of work to do around the refinement of the way that some of these products show up. And so kind of convenience and ability for your customer to purchase something and be ready to rock with it will continue to be really important. So I think those would be 2 big trends I'll continue to watch over the next 3 years.
Very good. Very good. No, some really, really interesting insights there. So thank you so much for coming on, Krista. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll meet in person and see you again soon.
Yes. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jamie.